Another much anticipated episode here on the Data Storytellers podcast, because my guest is none other than Callie Cogley of Cox Automotive. I've been working with Cox for a while within the Data Storytellers community, and I appreciated so much the energy and the collaborative posture and the insights and the experiences that Callie brought to the conversation so far. So I did propose that we should share some of that inspiration with the public in real time. And we've been preparing for this podcast for a while. I mean, it's crazy times everywhere out there in the world of data analytics and business. So finding a perfect time is not always easy, but we're here and finally the camera's rolling. So Callie, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Callie, today what we're going to talk about is very much in line with the project of the Data Storytellers in general, but also especially this year when we take these career deep dives, when we conceptualize what really made the successes of your career possible. Like, what were those factors at play? What was that professional posture? What were the key tactics and strategies that you use in order to drive positive change? And of course, in order to do that, we will need to understand both the context of your career, where you're coming from, the organization that you work for, the culture that you guys are driving, the history of the company and how data analytics plays a role in it, and then how did you navigate those waters? So a lot to talk about. Not enough time as always when you and I are connected, but I'm very excited to dive in.
Absolutely. Me too.
So, Callie, before we do that deep dive, maybe would you mind giving a short introduction into your journey into analytics? How did you become an analytics professional?
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to be at a really awesome organization. So I actually started at dealer.com, which is owned by Cox Automotive, the day after I graduated college. And I started in an account management role. So working directly with our retailers and helping them with their digital strategy. And this was 16 years ago. So the digital space was much different. And automotive, was just coming into the digital space at that time. So I was lucky enough to kind of learn alongside our retailers as they were learning, I was learning and expanding my knowledge on how to support them best as the business went from largely brick and mortar to transactions starting online and conversations starting online and driving into the business. And I kind of really enjoyed what I was doing and then started managing a team of folks that were doing that role pretty quickly after, and found that as I was doing performance reviews with them and trying to understand how many calls they were making a day, were they reaching out to their contacts, were they filling out paperwork properly, where we had to track things, I didn't have that information. And so when I was going into performance reviews, it was going on like heart and feel, right? Like, how do I feel this person did? And a lot of that, has to do with your relationship with a person and not as much the work they're actually completing. And so I think what really I struggled with was finding a way to equitably speak to performance without having metrics. And so I started down this journey to collect as much data and information as I could about the work that our teams were doing. They were working out of a call system that had a database that the data lived in, right? And I knew that existed somewhere. So I started contacting our IT professionals. How can I get access to the data? How can I pull that information? And then same with our ticketing system, how can we start tracking the work that's being done through ticketing systems? Are we seeing a lot of defects? Are we seeing time to resolution really slow for certain people, right? So I started pulling together all of these metrics about my team members, and I was able to kind of build out my own performance scorecard for every quarter that we did our reviews. And I did it for my whole team. And then I found that other managers were asking me to help them put that together for their teams. I was doing a lot of it in Excel, so really, really rudimentary, right? Like just trying to find the best way to get the numbers out there, collecting spreadsheets and dicing and slicing and dicing them and putting them together as best I could. And then I, stumbled upon some other products that others in our data part of our org, which was in IT, we're using like SAP business objects. So I was like, hey, can I get access to that? How can I get access to that? And started helping, like that started helping me build some automated reporting that we were like bursting out data to places. And so I just kind of like built small pieces from curiosity. And I know that the data exists, right? Like our systems and solutions, as you're kind of going through this, like we have a ticketing system, we have a phone call system. I know it's collecting and storing data somewhere. How it's doing that, I don't think anyone had really taken the time to delve into, or hadn't
Mhm.
had the time, I'd say. And so I was lucky enough from my curiosity and from my need to find a better way to perform or to recognize performance to actually um, just put the data together. So I started learning different systems. I started going to classes on how to write SQL, and I started um, just really delving in my free time to build out dashboards. I was young and I didn't have a family, and I had the time and energy to put into learning and building my career. And little did I know that data and analytics was going to end up being my career one day. But I found it really fun and exciting. So I continued down that journey. Eventually, I started teaching myself PHP and JavaScript along with my SQL, and I ended up building a data platform for our teams that was um, pre Tableau. I mean, Tableau probably existed, but I don't know if our company would have invested in it at the time because we were still small and scrappy startup world. And so I just started building this application that people could access, and it tapped into our login system so that they didn't have to have a different username or password or anything like that. And I just started kind of doing it in my free time. I didn't really tell anyone I was doing it. And then one
You
day I
just
put
like building.
together,
You just like building things in your free
I do.
time.
I love solving, right? So yeah, and then I ended up proposing that to our leader at the time, or showing it to him, saying, "Hey, like I've been working on this. I think it'd be really valuable. Can I continue to spend time on this during work hours?" And he basically gave my blessing and said, "Hey, take the time you need. This is going to be so valuable and helpful to our teams." And then I ended up doing that full time for quite a while, and kind of that's how I jump started my career into analytics, was just finding a need and then digging to make it work to support the role I was doing.
I love how entrepreneurial you were in this, if you think about it, because like in the beginning, you were just basically one of your personal needs. There is a saying
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur world that scratch your own itch at first. Scratch your
Mm-hmm.
own itch. What
Mm-hmm.
is pain that you have that you would like to solve? And yeah, well, you needed the data. That the pain was
Yep.
that okay, I might love this person, might have a great relationship, but in order to make this relationship even more mutually beneficial, objective truth would
Mm-hmm.
be incredibly useful. So we were trying to get that
Mm-hmm.
data, but
Absolutely.
there were barriers there and gaps
Mhm,
to get that data.
mhm,
So that was one sign. Then when you validate the idea, almost it validates itself. Is others
mhm,
are looking for it, others are asking you for it, so that
mhm.
you can identify that there's a demand that's not being fulfilled for whatever reason. It's not
Absolutely.
right now not being serviced. And then you stepped
Mhm.
in your free time, again, very, very entrepreneurial, to just put something together to build it and take a shot at it. And there you go. You acquired the time to work on it, acquired the resources to build it.
Mhm.
So I love how you came to it. And
Thanks.
so maybe we can just spend a second there, that because
Yeah.
there are conceptions slash misconceptions around the need for the technical know-how as a data analytics
Mhm.
leader.
Mhm.
You said
Mhm.
that you kind of self-educated on a few of those
I did.
elements. How did you
Mhm.
find that, and what do you recommend people do who are on a similar journey to what you were on?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the same case for everyone, so I'm gonna put that out there. But I
Mhm.
found a lot of times when I was taking classes in college, if I couldn't apply the knowledge, it didn't always click, right? Like it didn't always make sense as to why I was learning it or how to apply it or where I was going to apply it. However, when I was in the workplace, everything I was doing was for an end goal, right? Like I knew where I was trying to get, and I had to figure out how to get there. And the paths could either be really straight and easy to walk down, or they could be really complicated with lots of hurdles along the way, getting servers stood up and trying to identify the right teams that could give me access to certain items. I actually had to sit with our data IT team for, I think it was 3 months before they would give me full access to SQL so that I didn't take down our servers. So definitely the hurdles, right, of getting there. But I think that the mindset is, at the end of the day, the mindset, right, is if you know what you're trying to do and you have a goal, it's easier to learn things to
Mhm.
get there than it is to just learn things for the sake of learning. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
contextualized within a framework of what success is, what failure
Mhm.
is, the consequences of those, what is the meaning of that. We
Mhm.
just spoke about this with another one of our members, Nicole Coolidge from Emerson, and it was really about that there is, with regards to storytelling and change management, like how they
Mhm.
aligned some of these individual stories over at Emerson with regards to
Mhm.
the company's perspective or the finance perspective, supply chain perspective, data analytics team perspective, and then
Mhm.
basically understanding these missions, having this mission map, and then aligning those perspectives. So if something goes wrong, you just kind of know that you need to identify where is
Absolutely.
the disconnect. So I see a lot of resonance here with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you don't, and it's the same with you, any product development, for example, this is like a great way to kind of delve into how it applies in a
Mhm.
bigger space. But product development, if you don't know what you're developing for or what the goal of what you're building is meant to do or what we're looking for from a performance standpoint, it's really hard to know if it's successful.
Mhm.
Right. And I find that's where we're constantly as analytics practitioners, right, going into conversations with products and product and engineering. And I know that this isn't just, specific to my organization, and saying, hey, you're doing this awesome change, this new update, what are we expecting from it? How could we measure whether this is successful? And the conversation sometimes takes a turn, and they're like, I didn't really think, like, we just thought we had to do it. And
Mhm.
then the question is, like, why? Let's get behind that. And what does success look like? Because we need to be measuring that, otherwise we're building for the sake of building, right, instead of really building for success. Using data to drive what to build, and then using data to recognize, did what we build actually solve what we went out to solve, and is that garnering additional performance benefit,
Mhm.
right?
And if you
So it's really
don't,
interesting.
absolutely, and if you don't do that, right, so you're missing out on huge opportunities for learning and improvement in a way where, let's say, if the successes are not contextualized, right,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
actually will fail to drive long-term positive
Mhm.
change. But
Mhm.
then also the failures that you have, I mean, you can absolutely take advantage of those moments to
Mhm.
fix issues. But if these things are not contextualized, they are
Mhm.
not, then they are just in an echo, in a vacuum, right? So
Exactly. Mhm.
so there's a lot of inefficiency long term that comes
Mhm.
from that specifically. So
Mhm.
okay, that's very interesting for me. So basically, as you were building things on your own, putting it together, then
Mhm.
how did that scale further for you? So you've been there, how
Yeah.
long have you been with Cox altogether?
I just had my 16th year anniversary.
Congratulations. Yes,
Thank
yes, I
you.
remember. And then when did things get serious about data analytics during
Yeah.
your time there?
Yeah, I think it was when I started building this application. We called it Dovetail, as we
Mhm.
were trying to kind of connect our way of looking at performance with the consumers that, or with the people that needed to consume that data. So we were trying to dovetail our delivery. And so when I finally went 100% on this application, and then we hired lots of others to work on it as well, and it grew to being the hub for all of our client facing teams, so our dealer support team as well as our account management teams, to uh, review performance, understand what was going on with clients, but also what was happening with the team members themselves and their performance. And additionally, we added in kind of our wiki space in there, so we ingested a WordPress posting solution so that we could do weekly updates as to what's going on in our division as our division grew. So it ended up just kind of being a hub of data and analytics, as well as really any information as it related to that part of the organization. I was lucky enough, to be a big part of that and growing that, and I enjoyed it, every minute of it. But I did find that I was leaning more into the consulting on the data that was coming from it, and moving more away from the development side. So doing a lot of the requirements gathering, the solutioning, and then the delivery of what we were building as opposed to the building, which was great and totally fine. I was lucky enough, an opportunity came up for a large OEM. Came and asked if we could get a dedicated analyst in the organization, and we had already had one for a little while, but that person was moving up and on, so they were looking for someone else that could take on that role with that OEM, and so they asked if I would go out for it because I had analytics background, client solutioning background, and I was lucky enough to go into that role, and I was in it for 6 or 7 years with this large OEM, and I got to travel with them everywhere, kind of work with their field teams, do big data storytelling conferences with them, teaching how to use data storytelling in their conversations, but just doing full on consulting around data and analytics using our, at the time, Dealer.com solutions, and then eventually Cox Automotive solutions in conversations. And that's really, I think, when I became a heavy in data practitioner and really just heads down deep into the data, not building an application anymore, but really using that data to drive business change. And so that's really how I think I moved from a more data developer to a data consultant and practitioner.
And then, so this is, I love it. I love the whole entrepreneurial journey. And then now you are in a role where you're the analytics initiatives director. Okay, so
Yes.
how did that happen? And then what is this role?
Yeah. So I think over time, something that, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, I do have an entrepreneurial mindset. I tend to take things that uh, nobody has really tried to connect the dots on and try and find that connection, or dig into certain products and solutions and become a subject matter expert on them from the ground up, understanding how it was developed, where it lives, how it was tagged, what the tagging looks like, where it's collected, how it's curated, and then ideally find out what's the story behind it. What is it telling us, right? And so I did that with several big projects, and um, I really love the idea of taking something that doesn't exist and creating something, and something of value, right? Like something that the business has to catapult them to the next step. I'm a doer. I will say that I sometimes back off on the planning side just to try and get stuff done, and then take my time to document and put together what we did after the fact. And that's just my way of getting us to progress forward, right? Like, how can we progress? Where can we go next? And so I've been lucky enough in this role to take on those big projects, the newer ideas in the organization that haven't really been fully baked yet, right? Or we've got these two disparate solutions. We know that they connect somehow. This might be a piece that's framed into this website, but the data sets are completely living separately. How can we connect those? How can we tell that full consumer journey? That's always been really fun for me. That's an exercise that allows me to really push my creativity at the same time that it pushes the bounds of what I'm capable of, right?
Mm.
Like, the harder it is, sometimes the more fun it is for me to dig into and try and figure out. So that's really the kind of role I'm in today. I'm a problem solver. If there isn't a way of doing it today, my goal is to try and find a way and work with the teams that we need to work with to get there.
So I can't wait to also look at that playbook in more depth. And it was fascinating to then follow, because we had these conversations before, but never
Mhm.
just hashing this out in depth from this angle. And
Yeah.
yeah,
To
go
speak
ahead.
about that, I just to add to that, we had talked about in one of the master classes, there was a position that I think it was Jane Urban spoke
Jane
about.
Urban, yes.
Yeah,
I think
she
she's
had as
now
a
with Otsuka, and she used to be
okay.
with Takeda.
Yeah, so
There's
she
something
had
about
stood up a
Japanese pharma
position.
companies. Yeah,
Yeah, she had stood up a position that was called the data execution, or
yeah.
the puzzle solver position. And that really resonated with kind of what I'm doing. So it was interesting to find in concept really kind of what my role is, because I think my role blends so many things and it isn't always super concrete as to Callie does X, Y, and Z. Does that
Hmm.
make
No,
sense?
absolutely. And
Um,
I love that takeaway from Jane. I already told you
mhm,
that when we were producing the data story, that was just something that she mentioned offhandedly. And I was like, oh, wait a second. What about the data execution? Let's zoom in on
mhm.
that. So that's why she created that
Yeah,
slide.
I
Uh,
love it.
on it. Yeah. It was typically something that it was for them. It was almost invisible. It was just part of the process. But then it really
Mhm,
became the tip of the spear of that case
mhm,
study. I think.
mhm.
Shout out to Jane if she's listening.
Yes.
So before we dive into, because also I always say that you guys need to be both the architects building things and to
Mhm,
have that mindset, but also the ambassador. So the
mhm,
person who can tell the story and understands the story. Before we do that, because we looked at your progression as a professional, but then when it comes to a data-driven business and what role analytics plays in an organization's life, we can't really skip over the organization's history itself. Right? It's actually
mhm,
always a very important part of why that change is happening, how the change should
mhm,
happen, how will it gain traction, and conceptualizing that narrative that you need to drive as an analytics leader. So Cox Automotive, if someone who's listening, maybe they came across Cox, I mean, probably it's like one of those brands that everyone kind of came across, but
mhm.
they don't know exactly what Cox is doing. Would you mind giving a short like introduction to that and how the company started and
Absolutely.
all that, as much as it's possible to explore?
Yeah, so Cox Automotive itself actually started, and I hope I get this right, as a newspaper publication out of Dayton, Ohio. Or it was they owned a newspaper publication, and then many after that. So really more in the print world for many years, including Auto Trader, the printed version. As most people, at least when I was a child, I remember seeing them on the newsstands. And then obviously autotrader.com later became one of their bread and butter pieces over at Cox Automotive. So there's many, so Cox Automotive is specifically focused on the automotive industry, and we stand up solutions for retailers as well as for consumers to engage and purchase vehicles. And at the end of the day, the goal of Cox Automotive is to make the buying process easier, right? And the selling process easier. It's a combination.
And it's not
And
easy to buy and sell cars. I actually have friends. Actually, one of my guys that I trained back in the day is in car sales right now.
Mhm,
He was a young guy. I think when we worked together, he was like 17 years old or
mhm.
so. And also, I know as someone who's looking to purchase vehicles that it's not easy to purchase a vehicle. They don't make it easy for you.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on with the cyber attack for TDK right now.
Mm,
So there's a lot of focus on the automotive industry as it relates to their consumers want connectivity. Consumers want an easier way to purchase, right? They want to be able to go online and purchase a car without having to talk to anybody. A lot of consumers. Some consumers still want to be able to walk in and haggle with the dealer and go through that historical process, but we do find the newer generations don't want to do that, right? They want it to be an easier process. They want it to be delivered to their door. And
mm,
so at the end of the day, from a consumer perspective, Cox Automotive is just really trying to make the process easier so that it isn't a daunting task when you need to
yeah.
purchase a new car, right? We want to make it so that you can find out what can you afford, what kind of cars does that include, where can you get those cars, and as we go more digital, right, the availability of cars being delivered from further locations, so you don't have to just stick with, so I live in Vermont, right, so we have very few dealerships here. We don't even have a Lexus dealership in the whole state, if that gives you an
Oh,
idea.
oh.
So if I wanted a Lexus, I'd have to go out of state to buy a
Why?
Lexus.
Yeah.
But the opportunity, right, with the internet and with the ability to kind of showcase vehicles from everywhere, there's that's opening up the opportunity for consumers to get into different cars and those cars to end up in their driveway.
Mm,
So at the end of the day, Cox's goal, from a consumer and, as I already mentioned, from a consumer standpoint and from a retailer standpoint, is to just make the process easier,
mm,
less paperwork, more automation, hopefully get the car delivered to your driveway. So a lot of the work that we're doing is around that. Additionally, from a retailer perspective, we want to be able to get, the consumers to the retailer, right? So how can we do that? Through advertising solutions, through ensuring that their brand is front and center, on different platforms. So Cox is broad there. Additionally, we have our financing arm through DealerTrack. So if you've ever financed a vehicle, you've probably done it through DealerTrack
Mm.
solutions. So pretty much almost every part of the buying process and selling process, there's at least a piece of it through Cox Automotive at some point in a buyer's journey.
So that's really cool because I didn't know. I did for some reason I didn't know, or I might have known, but it didn't click that. Oh yeah, it was a newspaper first, and people
Mhm.
used the newspaper for a particular purpose, right?
Mhm.
But in part of what the newspaper offered was that okay, people can uh,
Mhm.
like
Advertise
actually offer
vehicles.
cars, and people who are
Yeah.
looking for vehicles can contact those people, and
So I
then
think back in the day, that's the way it happened. But,
exactly.
before our time, Laszlo.
Yeah, before our time, before our time. Well, for us, that's almost like inconceivable. But
Yeah.
now with this, I love seeing these kind of transitions when companies capitalize on an opportunity by providing genuine value, actually solving a pain,
Mhm.
removing
Mhm.
bureaucracy and pain from this
Mhm.
process. I think you guys are doing God's work in a way. So it's so I love that. And by the way, I was always thinking about that. That I'm the kind of person, just personally,
Yeah.
who I would actually enjoy I'm the kind of person I like checking everything out online and all that. But
Mhm.
when it would come to a car, specifically a car, I'd actually like to
Mhm.
smell it, touch it,
Mhm. Yeah.
drive it. So it should be a great experience. So why is it
Absolutely.
that it
Yeah.
is quite the opposite? So
So
you
we
got.
want to take those pain points out, Laszlo. So
Mhm.
that's the thing, right? So we want the part of the experience when consumers actually go to the dealership to be what you were just saying, right? We want them to be able to do those test drives, to smell the leather, to
Mhm.
really enjoy the part of the buying experience that is fun. Where the rest of it, we can automate that. We can do that
Mhm.
online. You can do that from the comfort of your home. That's the goal, right? Like, how do we make it so that you're in and out of the dealership, say in 45 minutes when you want to go get that car after they've walked you around and you're able to see how those vehicles were working and, whether that worked for you.
No, I love that. I love that. And also, so this might be. I'm looking at Cox. So Cox Communications is a telecoms company, but that's a different, right?
Yeah, so
Right.
Cox, it's an overarching business. So something that's really neat about Cox overall, and I think a lot of people don't know this, but their mission outside of obviously the automotive side and the cable side and the communications side is to make the world a better place. So they actually, all of our buildings are lead green
Mm.
certified. There's a huge focus on conserving energy as well as recycling and ensuring that we're net zero as it relates to our trash consumption or our trash solutioning in our
Yeah.
buildings, et cetera, right? So it's really neat to see how much they care about the environment and care what we're doing in this world. Even though we're in automotive, right? There's a lot of pieces to that, but they're really focusing on investing into EV
Hmm.
spaces, and additionally, they just started in. Standing up these farms, like Bright Farms. If you actually go to your grocery stores and you see salad from Bright Farms, that's actually something that Cox is invested in
Oh,
because they're
nice.
standing up these greenhouses in big areas so that we can get more healthy foods to into more hands, right, and make it a more sustainable process. So it's kind of neat what Cox does outside of our regular business, day to day, but they really are investing in the future of not just our world, but the people as well. So I don't know. I've always just felt that Cox is kind of doing it right. Not to like boast Cox here, but like truthfully, when you work for a company that you find actually cares, that's this company.
Oh yeah, and I love reflecting on these of these big companies because they have a history too. I mean, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
looking right now
Mm-hmm.
that Cox Communications specifically is 1962, right? And I imagine the Cox
Mm-hmm.
Communication was probably the newspaper arm too? And
Yeah, I think we're over 100 years old in some shape or form.
so this Cox Enterprise is probably, yeah. So you see
Yes.
that's exactly my point. You can just keep
Yeah.
going back. You can just
Yes, you
keep
can go
going back.
back forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just had a podcast with Lance Goldsmeyer from Dairy Queen, and
Hmm.
Dairy Queen is one of those iconic franchises. I
Hmm.
didn't know actually that they are the OG fast food. I thought it was probably Burger King or McDonald's. But again, I'm
Oh,
also from
interesting.
Europe, and we have McDonald's and
Mm-hmm.
Burger King, but not too much Dairy Queen. So only
Yeah.
since I live
Yeah.
in Canada have I known Dairy Queen. I don't have a sweet tooth, by the way, but ice cream is, if anything, would be my weakness. I was interested
I
in the Dairy
understand that.
Queen conversation, and something like in 1960, I just saw this LinkedIn
Hmm.
graph on it. In
Hmm.
1960, you had something like 10 times as many Dairy Queens than McDonald's
Hmm.
and Burger Kings and KFC's combined, right?
So
And
interesting.
yeah, absolutely. And then you have this old business, and the lens has been there for 10 years. What happened in the 10 years, and then how does analytics, how does that play a role in the Dairy Queen experience and
Hmm.
the culture of
Hmm.
the organization and the evolution of the business?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
with Cox and Cox Automotive specifically, right?
Hmm.
When do you think that kind of juncture happened really in a meaningful way when analytics became this huge part of the business? Because I know that in fact for Cox, even since I've been in business analytics, the name kept coming up in the analytics
Hmm.
uh, discussion. So how do you think that intersection kind of happened? Where were those touch points where, okay, Cox put analytics at the heart of the business and it really gained a position where they started to invest time and money into it?
Yeah, I think, believe it or not, because we were so many individual businesses for a long time, and then through purchasing over time, we've kind of come together. I think that each business had their own idea of what was needed to propel their part of the business forward. And I think in my opinion, it seems like every business had a relatively good grasp on the metrics for their solution or product or part of the business for a really long time. And so a lot of that, as we started to combine forces and really bring Cox Automotive to what it is today, it's the melding of those minds, right? It's the melding of those data sets. And I think what we're really on the pinnacle of right now is the connectivity between all of that, and what that means for understanding a consumer, understanding the consumer journey, and honestly, how we can drive that better experience that we were just talking about for our consumers through that connectivity. And truthfully, without that, it's almost impossible to understand what's working or not working, right? And I think Cox really understands that, and they're really trying to find the best way for us to take some of these more disparate analytics solutions that are really strong and really tell a great story of their part of the business and figure out how we can weave them together to understand the big picture.
Hmm. And now we're gonna reach the point where we really have to talk about the playbook itself. Now that we kind of
Uh-huh.
understand your journey and then Cox Automotive as well. So
Yeah.
what emerged in reflection for you as some of the keys for your success? Maybe we can go from that angle of what did you find to be the key challenges for you over
Mhm.
time? As okay, you came from this entrepreneurial angle, you were building
Mhm.
based on value, and you
Mhm.
started to build all that momentum. Now everything is changing at the same time, changing market
Mhm.
conditions, expanding
Mhm.
technology. What were your most difficult parts of that journey? And then we can look at it from the playbook angle.
Yeah, and I think it's I can't even look in the past. I think it's an ongoing thing is getting people to recognize the need for analytics and the need for ensuring that things are being properly tracked. And the connection between what we deliver and the success of the people helping curate that data, right? And I think that tends to be the constant conversation is when we're trying to get story points put to the side by engineering to get analytics on board. It's the ensuring that we give them the why is this important, what does this do, and getting them on board with that why, right? And I think that that's been historically the hardest part for people who maybe aren't as analytically minded. or don't always know what does this mean for me perspective of it. So I think the hardest thing has been figuring out how to have those conversations and get them on board with us at the end of the day. I do find that aligning performance for people that are helping curate data to some of the metrics that we're trying to collect. So their team having performance around metrics that we're actually delivering on helps them want to curate the metrics to be better, right? And to be more accurate. So I think we're finding ways to do it, but I will say that probably is one of the hardest things, is just ensuring that the people that help, generate the data that we need for day to day understand the need and the importance of, not just generating it, but generating meaningful and accurate data for us to use on our day to day.
So that's the governance piece. So those are very, very, very important. And again, even with the data governance piece, it's kind of what we saw is what's crucial is to not do data governance for the sake of data governance, but also do that with meaning and purpose, especially if you want those policies to be adopted and adhered to. Now, before we talk about that, and that's an interesting piece given your remit of analytics initiatives. So with getting people to recognize the need for analytics and the why. So do you have some examples from your like maybe a specific snapshot? Maybe we can just use, if you don't want to say like a specific scenario, maybe the shape and the form of it would be at least very interesting. Or if you have a specific one, I'm all ears.
Yeah. So I think from a product perspective, right? Like if we're working with our product teams and we are, we have our sales teams in the field. They've been out selling our solutions, selling our product based on, what we expect the product is going to do and garner for results. And, there have been times in my past, it's gotten a lot better, but in my past where the solution's been sold and it's been launched for a retailer. And then we have teams come back to us and say, hey, like, how's it doing? How's it doing? This launched, 2 months ago. We need to start, going back to the retailer with metrics. And, there have been conversations where I'm like, what launched for what retailer? When? And there's just that disconnect, right, of ensuring that things are being tracked when something is launched, right? Like thinking about not just the act of launching something, but actually, is it being tracked so that we can make sure it's doing what we promised the consumer that it would be doing? And so I would say that's actually been kind of a regular occurrence in my career. And I know I'm not the only one, right? In the master class, this is a conversation we had often. But I think that what we're really trying to do is ensure that when those scenarios happen, we have a postmortem conversation, right? Like, hey, we now are going to be standing up this tracking for you. We're now going to ensure, we understand what success looks like and we can start measuring it, but we're now 2 months behind on the collection of the data. We can't just make data up, right? And I think that's eye-opening, right? Like I think there tends to be this thing, right? This implied thing that data just collects automatically. Right. And I think that's a misnomer, right? Like I think there has to be education around how data is generated for us to ever get to the point where people think, oh, I wonder if this is being tracked, or I wonder if this can be tracked. I'm going to sell this. I think this is a really awesome opportunity for our retailer. We want to sell into them this opportunity, but I wonder if we're actually able to track it so that we can prove its value, right, after the fact. Otherwise, we're going to have churn, right? And so I think what we're trying to get, our front end teams to recognize is, that initial sale is great, but actually keeping people from proving out the performance is easier from a revenue perspective than generating new revenue, right? And so how do we keep people? We prove out our performance. If our performance isn't great, we send that to product and we have product adjust the product to get better performance, which then in the long term keeps the clients, right? And so it's that understanding of that connectivity that data provides in the life cycle of consumers purchasing, selling, staying within our ecosystem.
Hmm. And what did you find to be about this, like the most challenging in terms of getting that mindset implemented? I know it's the $1 billion question, and that's why we talk
Yeah.
about it all the time
Yeah.
on the masterclass
Mhm.
as well. But it's I
Mhm.
look at it as everything else, where bit by bit we can kind of chew it up, and
Mhm.
then this is what the whole even the advanced business communications and
Mhm.
storytelling course that we have is
Mhm.
kind of attacking that layer. But what has been your experience?
Yeah, the hardest part I think is um, understanding the long-term gain of something, right? And I think uh, a lot of times there's only so much capacity, right, on a team, and a lot of focus for capacity is getting new products or solutions set up, or getting new clientele in the door and servicing them. And so trying to get teams to carve out capacity to um, put analytics and tracking properly on our properties, right, is a hard conversation, because there's a trade-off that needs to be had, and it's finding out and trying to. So a conversation I had recently, right, is that well, I don't know if we're going to have capacity in this quarter to do that because we have to do X, Y, and Z. Um, and I said, I completely understand. Absolutely want to want you to know that I understand capacity constraints. But I do think that this is a really high priority because we're at risk of X amount of churn. And if we have that churn, then the performance of your product isn't as strong, right? And so what we're trying to solve for here is getting um, our churn numbers down and keeping the clients that we have happy, right? And I understand that we're building new things and we're trying to get more people in door due to these new features, but I also think we need to be focusing on the people that we have today in the now, right? And so I think it's that conversation, it's that balance. We were able to get it scheduled, so it was at the end of the day we were able to have that conversation and really get them to understand the value and get them to see the long term gains. Although it may, excuse me, cost your team some time now, it can actually save three other teams. Say, it's costing your team say 5 hours now. It's saving 30 hours from other teams later in calls into dealer support for something being broken, or um, something is looking wrong from a metrics perspective and we're getting a lot of calls in to try and solve it. So I think at the end of the day, it's getting them to recognize that it's not always about their product and solution, but really the bigger picture.
Got it. And so I also see a lot where you're coming from, both of how you started out in data analytics and the kind of the angle that you take on this. That there are all these, and I know that we talked about this, right? But then
Yep.
these career growth and evolution
Mm-hmm.
principles, almost,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have your
Mm-hmm.
inquisitive approach and the lifelong learning,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also like the whole idea of the trust building. So something that I
Mm-hmm.
observed, and it's not like you were saying it, but I'm getting the sense that there's an underlying theme of people just trusting you to jump
Mm-hmm.
into certain things. You build
Mm-hmm.
something and you make the case, and your business partner trusts that, yeah, that's worth doing. And then when you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
implement and gain adoption to these things, there is an element of trust. So why do you think that you managed over the years? No one has a perfect score, I imagine, right? But that
Yeah.
you've been largely successful in generating trust within the organization amongst your stakeholders.
I will say I genuinely care and I have a passion for what I do. And at the end of the day, my goal is to not just service the project I'm on or the solution I'm working on, but really ensure that everyone along the way that's helpful and that is like driving us to a better place gets recognized for being a part of it. Um, I can't do any of this on my own, right? Like that is one thing that analysts, maybe in a small space you might be able to do it all on your own, do all the tagging, all the curation, everything, but in a big company like Cox, it takes a full team, right? And so building those relationships with the people that you're working with every day, ensuring that they recognize that you appreciate what they're doing, right? I tend to stay the extra time. If someone needs help, they're calling me at, I don't know, 10 of 5. And I know that I have someone who can watch my son when he gets home, right? I'll stay the extra time if they need the help, right? And although does it do anything for me? Not necessarily, other than maybe build that relationship. But that's it, right? Like it's that building that trust, it's working with those people. And at the end of the day, I genuinely love the people I work with. I think we're very lucky to be with some really collaborative people. But I ask a lot of teams, and all I can do is when someone asks something of me, be there for them too.
And so
So
that you mentioned that, oh, well, you realize that you can't do everything. And then you also mentioned your son, because as a father, I also know that saying always resonated with me, that it takes a village to raise a child.
yeah,
Right? And
yeah,
when you're building something, it's your child. It's something that you're
yeah.
investing into, that you believe in, and it takes
Hmm.
a village. You won't be able
Hmm.
to do it all on your own. So I think parenthood actually has a bunch of these great
It's funny
professional
you say
lessons.
that, Laszlo. That's so funny. So I started on the project I'm on right now.
Hmm.
The day I came out of maternity leave.
Hmm.
And I've been on it now for 2 years, and it's been quite the journey. And at one point, my boss said, "Do you sometimes feel like you're raising 2 infants?"
I, you see, this is
um,
not scripted. It's just yeah, and you guys are not alone.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just
absolutely. But I think it's fun. For me, I like a challenge. That's just naturally who I am. And I feel like, does it always go smooth? Absolutely not, right? Just like parenthood.
mhm.
But at the end of the day, it's small wins that need to be celebrated. And if you can celebrate those small wins, then those bigger wins are that much more awesome when they do happen, because you're not just like waiting and waiting and hoping you get to that big win, but really you're celebrating as like each little thing happens and is successful along the way.
Mm. And I would love to spend a just maybe a few minutes on the storytelling
Yeah.
consulting and education that you're doing in the business, because I do want to get a snapshot. I knew that this was going to be the case, that we're going to come up against the cloud. But time management is always a challenge. So at least when you're having conversations like this, I definitely want to look at the quick roundup outline of enhancing personal value, and then we talked about those elements. But before we do that, the storytelling education, how did that come about, and
Yeah.
what is this?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to work with lots of teams. As I already said, I came from a customer service background originally, and then I worked with this OEM, and so I was often with the program team, which is the customer service side of the OEM team for our company. So I spent a lot of time with those teams, and just helping them when they had to go into executive conversations and use data to kind of really drive those conversations forward. And what I found with those teams is that I was constantly having the same conversation about like how to approach um, using data in your conversations that doesn't make data boring, right?
Mm.
So I always, part of my conversation, or part of my uh, presentation is actually about Dirty Dancing, the movie. If you've Have you seen Dirty Dancing?
Yeah,
Please tell
yes,
me.
but it was
Okay, okay. So
I
it's
think I
funny.
was
It
probably
falls flat
15.
on
I was
certain generations,
no,
by the way. The
but
newer
I was young.
generations, it
Yeah.
falls flat on.
Yeah. I think I saw it when I was 15, but yeah, it
Okay,
was
okay.
yeah. I won't
Well, the
remember the
concept,
details. Yeah.
that's okay. I'll take you on a little journey here,
Yeah,
but this is
please.
kind of how I explain, why data is so important, and kind of the way that you tell a data story and why it's so important, right? So, the movie Dirty Dancing, it's about a young lady who, with her family, that they go to this resort, and she ends up, long story short, she ends up falling in love with the dance instructor,
Patrick
and he falls
Swayze,
in love
right?
with her, Patrick Swayze,
Yeah.
that's right.
He's,
And there's like, all these dance scenes that they're having, and there's lots of deep conversations, family moments, just lots of intermingling with people, right? So what makes the story is all of those pieces
mm,
of the story, right? So the conversations, the love story, the she drops a watermelon as she walks into the worker party, whatever it is, right? All of those are like kind of help drive that story on to the end where she does the big, lift scene, and it's the what most well-known part of the movie, right? But if you think about it, if we were to take out all the other characters in the movie except for Baby, who's that main character, and she's the only one that's in the entire movie, and she's dancing along, she's dancing by herself, she's going to this party by herself, she's jumping into the lake by herself. She's largely just, it's just her, right? The story kind of falls flat, right? Because there's really no other characters to help tell that story. And so think about this in the same way with Data, right? If I were to come into a conversation and I simply said, well, your visitation this month is 643 visitors. The question is going to be, is that good? Is that bad?
What's
the context,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, is that up? Is it down? The problem is I didn't bring that metric in with its friends, right? So if you think about it, like we need in Dirty Dancing her to be dancing with her friends to help tell that story, and with her family. It's the same with Data, right? We need to bring in the metric friends. And it sounds so corny, but it truthfully, you need to tell a story, otherwise metrics fall flat. And so at the end of the day, when you're thinking of visitation, the first thing that you want to say is that up or down from the previous time period? And what was that time period? Were there other drivers, right? If it is up from the previous time period, did they put more money into advertising that drove more consumers, right? Or did we see an increase in SEO value or, SEO rankings, so that brought more consumers in, right? Like, so we're starting to really build on that story and let those data elements dance with their friends. And that really helps get us to that data story. And so I do have a meme that I put in my presentation of Dirty Dancing, but I feel like I need to find a more relevant movie now, because the younger generations that I present to are like, I don't know that movie.
I think it's iconic. I think it's iconic though, because so Dirty Dancing is one of those movies that for some reason I know about it, right? And I know, and actually with Dirty Dancing, I did not expect that we could make a connection between Dirty Dancing and Data Today, but we did. So I love it, and I'm not sure that if you have a newer movie, I mean, there are fewer iconic movies these days, and a fewer iconic movies. You could have probably made the example with that Ryan Gosling movie that was about.
Maybe.
You remember?
I was thinking like Maverick, the new Maverick Top Gun movie, maybe.
Yeah, but I think even Maverick, it's a great movie, by the way. It's a fantastic movie.
I actually, top movie in the last 5 years, I'd say.
Really, really, really good movie. Everyone should watch it. It absolutely hit the spot. And you see, it's also...
I was worried about it, but it came in
clutch. I mean, and you were worried about it because of Top Gun, because of the name, because of the... are they going to mess up Top Gun? Please don't mess up Top Gun. Not Top Gun.
Exactly. You can't ruin it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And they didn't. And they didn't. I loved it. And you see, maybe, and you can use, but the important thing is that it needs to be kind of like an iconic movie. So my point with the Ryan Gosling movie would have been that it might be a newer movie, it might be actually a good movie, but it's not an iconic movie. I already forgot the title.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So that's the problem here.
making my point. So
exactly.
Okay, this is really cool. I would love to also dive deeper into that, of how that works, and the metrics need friends. We just don't have time today, but we're gonna continue the conversation on the career playbook front. And just before we wrap up, I would like to just leave the listeners with some of your personal advice on how to enhance your personal value as a professional. So if you could just maybe run through some of those elements, because we already conceptualized, I think it would be a nice way to finish the podcast, and everything that was left unsaid we can explore as we further develop the personal playbook.
Yeah, I think that's something that has been really valuable for me in my career is really finding specialization or dedicating your time to becoming a subject matter expert in something where there isn't one today as it relates to analytics, right? So if there's a new product or solution that is coming out or has been coming out, taking the time to really dive into that, ask to be involved in the meetings around it, ask to be a part of any of the launch conversations, right? Like maybe you start listening in on calls with clients where they're talking about their experience with that solution so that you can really understand what matters, right? When it comes to a metrics perspective, become that, as I said, subject matter expert for that specific space. And that allows people to trust you and know that you're that person to go to and ask those questions, and you're that confidant, right? To really understand what's happening, where are we going, just be that person. So I think a specialization or a dedication to really focusing on a few small areas will help you kind of build who you are in this space. um, I think the other thing that has worked really well for me is I'm execution focused, right? So I've mentioned it a few times throughout this, but I really, really thrive on getting work done, right? Getting things out the door, putting something in front of people that they haven't had before. Really trying to create value where value hasn't been available yet. And I think that if you can focus on, delivery and action over, say, just building the process to get there, or focusing your energy on the process, as I said, like the process to get there, instead just like, let's get there and then we can iterate and make it better over time. Additionally, we can go back and document everything after the fact. But if we can deliver and get it into the marketplace or get it into our business, the opportunity to use that is far more advanced than if we wait another 6 months, right? And we can also grow faster and make it better faster by just getting something out there rather than nothing. So I think that's the other thing. Um, and I think don't be afraid. And we already talked about the data storytelling workshops that I've done, but I've done them throughout our organization. And I think what has been most valuable about that for me is I'm really learning other parts of the organization and some of the pain points that they have. Some of the teams that I've done my trainings for are stakeholders for some of our work that we do. And I'm able in those conversations and in those trainings with those teams to learn more about the work that they do, learn where they're struggling, help them understand the solutions that we have available to them today and how to use them better in their business. So I think instead of staying siloed and really like stuck in the analytics space and not really going outside of it, instead of doing that, focus on, really become a part of the solution and part of the teams that are your stakeholders, so that it's more of a partnership rather than they request something and you deliver it. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, and it's so funny that as we're kind of doing the deep dives on the practitioner playbooks, and a bunch of people that you will get to work with during the year. So if you
Mhm.
like, Nashville is coming up too. We have a bunch of these stories that focus on what you mentioned about getting things done, right? So there's a fancy
Mhm.
name around it if you want to look at it that way. It'll be the agile stuff, right? Like the agile
Mhm. Mhm.
management, and
Mhm. Framework. Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. Or with the collaboration and the camaraderie with those teams, Lean Six Sigma,
Mhm.
right? It's funny that actually we
Mhm.
have two case studies, one from Coca-Cola, the other from Pepsi,
Mhm.
where their leaders, analytics leaders, applied those. And I just see that it's a wonderful kind of amalgamation of all of these, and I think it's a great note to finish the podcast on too. So with those who are looking to really drive the profession forward and their careers forward, I think there was a lot of a treasure trove of some of these stories and insights. I really appreciated our conversation, Callie, and
Same.
our members will hear from you more, because we're just getting started with the content production.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was really fun. I'm excited for what's next.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure, and until next time.